Welcome back to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. Deep in the Appalachian wilderness, where cell phones become useless and the nearest help is hours away, people have encountered things that defy explanation. These mountains have watched over secrets for centuries, and sometimes those secrets don't want to stay buried. The dense forests swallow sound, the fog plays tricks on your mind, and when darkness falls, you realize just how alone you really are. Tonight, we're taking you into the heart of these ancient woods, where 11 people experienced something they'll never forget. Each person walked into those mountains as a skeptic, but what they brought back changed them forever. The question isn't whether you believe them. The question is whether you'd survive what they survived. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. If you're new to our channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join the Haunted Fears horror family. And if you're a returning member of our family, drop a comment below and let us know which Appalachian story gave you chills. Now let's dive into these disturbing encounters. I heard my dead mother's voice singing in the woods at 2 in the morning, and every instinct told me to follow it. That's when I knew something in those mountains wanted me gone. I'd been camping solo in the Smokies for 3 days, somewhere deep off the Panther Creek Trail in Tennessee. I'm not the type who scares easy. 37 years old, been hiking these mountains since I was a kid with my old man, and I'd spent plenty of nights alone in a tent with nothing but the sound of water and wind to keep me company. But that night, everything changed. It was late October, and the temperature had dropped to around 40 degrees. I'd set up camp about 100 yards from the creek, in a small clearing surrounded by hemlock trees so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction once the sun went down. I'd made a small fire, ate my freeze-dried meal, and climbed into my sleeping bag around 10. The sound of Panther Creek rushing over rocks usually puts me right to sleep, but that night I kept waking up. Something felt off, though I couldn't place it. Around 2 a.m., I woke up completely. Not the groggy, half-awake state you get when you need to use the bathroom, but wide awake, heart already pounding like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. That's when I heard it. Singing. A woman's voice, clear as day, coming from across the creek. She was singing Lavender's Blue, this old lullaby my mother used to sing to me when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. The same melody, the same soft tone, even the way she'd drag out certain words. My mother, Noah, had died 8 years ago from cancer. I was there when she passed, held her hand in that hospital room, and now I was hearing her voice floating through the darkness of the Smoky Mountains. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cold. The fire had died down to just embers, casting almost no light. The singing continued, steady and patient, coming from somewhere on the other side of Panther Creek. The sound of the water made it hard to pinpoint exactly where, but it was definitely across from my camp, maybe 50 yards downstream. I grabbed my headlamp and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the thick fog that had rolled in while I slept. I hadn't noticed the fog before, but now it was everywhere, sitting heavy in the hollow like something alive. The singing didn't stop. If anything, it got clearer, more insistent. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this wasn't real, that I was still asleep or having some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by altitude or bad water or something. But it sounded so much like her. Not just the voice, but the feeling behind it. That same warmth and safety I remembered from childhood. I found myself walking toward the creek. I didn't decide to walk. My legs just started moving, pulling me through the underbrush and over fallen logs. The beam from my headlamp bounced with each step, creating wild shadows in the fog. The singing got louder as I approached the water's edge. Panther Creek wasn't wide, maybe 15 feet across at this point, but it was moving fast over slick rocks. During the day, I'd watched the current and decided against crossing anywhere near my camp. Too dangerous. But now, standing on the bank with my mother's voice calling from the other side, crossing seemed like the only option. I stepped into the water. It was shockingly cold, immediately soaking through my boots and hiking pants. The current pushed against my legs, stronger than I'd expected. I took another step, then another, using my hands to steady myself on the larger rocks. The singing continued, patient and encouraging, like she was guiding me home. I was halfway across when I realized something was wrong. The voice was moving, not just echoing differently because of the terrain, but actually moving, getting further away. I was in the middle of the creek, water up to my thighs, and the singing was now coming from somewhere deeper in the woods on the opposite bank. That's when I stopped. Really stopped, and forced myself to think clearly despite the pull I felt toward that voice. Why would my mother's voice be moving away from me? Why would it be leading me deeper into the forest in the middle of the night? I looked down at the water rushing past my legs, then ahead at the opposite bank. My headlamp illuminated the thick wall of rhododendron and mountain laurel that grew right up to the creek's edge. Beyond that, nothing but darkness and fog and those ancient hemlocks. If I crossed and followed that voice, I'd be stumbling through some of the densest, most disorienting terrain in the Smokies with nothing but a headlamp. The singing changed. It was still my mother's voice, still Lavender's blue. But now there were other voices joining in, harmonizing. I recognized my Uncle Vance, who died in a car accident when I was 12, and my grandmother Kaya, and my childhood friend Dash, who drowned in a lake our senior year of high school. All of them singing together, their voices blending in perfect harmony, calling to me from somewhere in those dark woods. That's when I understood. Whatever was out there, it wasn't them. It was something else, something that knew exactly which voices would make me follow, something that had been watching me long enough to know who I'd lost and who I'd missed. I turned around in the water and started back toward my bank. The singing got louder, more urgent. My mother's voice broke from the harmony, calling my name. Not singing anymore, but calling, pleading, saying she'd waited so long to see me, asking why I was leaving, begging me to come back. I stumbled on the rocks, nearly went down, caught myself with my hands in the icy water. The current was stronger heading back. Or maybe it just felt that way, because now I was fighting against what the voices wanted. They were all calling my name now, all the people I'd loved and lost, their voices overlapping and echoing through the hollow. When I finally dragged myself back onto my side of the bank, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. I looked back across the creek, shining my headlamp into the fog and darkness. The singing had stopped. Everything had stopped. Even the natural sounds of the forest seemed muted, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I made it back to my tent and sat there, dripping and freezing, listening. Nothing. Just the creek, and eventually the normal night sounds of the forest returning one by one. Crickets, an owl, the wind moving through the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my tent with my knife in my hand, waiting for sunrise. When the first gray light started filtering through the hemlocks, I packed up my gear faster than I'd ever packed anything in my life. I didn't bother with my usual routine of making coffee or eating breakfast. I just wanted out. The hike back to the trailhead took me 3 hours, and I practically ran the last mile. When I finally reached my truck, I sat in the driver's seat and just breathed for a solid 10 minutes before I could even put the key in the ignition. I've been hiking these mountains my whole life, and I've never felt anything like what I felt that night. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Whatever was out there in Panther Creek Hollow, it knew me. It knew exactly what to say and whose voice to use. And if I'd crossed that creek, if I'd followed those voices into the deep woods, I don't think I would have come back. I looked at a topographic map later, checking the area where I'd been camped. About a quarter mile from my site, in the direction that singing had been leading me, the terrain drops off into a steep gorge. Straight down, maybe 200 feet of sheer rock face hidden by the rhododendron and fog. If I'd followed those voices in the dark, I would have walked right off the edge. I still camp in the Smokies. I still hike Panther Creek Trail, But I don't camp alone anymore, and I sure as hell don't camp in that particular hollow. Some places in these mountains don't want visitors, and they know exactly how to get rid of the ones who don't listen. If you've experienced something similar in the Appalachian wilderness, drop your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe to Haunted Fears and join our horror family. We've got 10 more disturbing encounters from the deep woods coming up, and trust me, it only gets darker from here. The trail markers I'd followed 100 times before started leading me in directions that shouldn't exist. By the time I realized something was wrong, I'd lost 6 hours and hadn't moved more than 200 yards. My name is Maisie, and I've been hiking Dolly Sod's wilderness in West Virginia every weekend for the past 4 years. Started coming here after my divorce. Needed something to clear my head on weekends. I'm a data analyst from Pittsburgh. Spend all week staring at spreadsheets, so getting out into nature became my therapy. I'm not some expert wilderness person, just someone who found a trail system I liked and kept coming back. Or at least I did, until that Saturday in early November, when the trail decided it didn't want me anymore. I'd started at the Bear Rocks trailhead like always, planning to do my usual 12-mile loop. The weather was perfect for hiking, crisp but comfortable with clear blue skies. I checked the forecast 3 times before leaving, packed my regular gear, left my itinerary with my roommate Camilla like I always do. Everything by the book. The first 2 miles were completely normal. I passed the same landmarks I always passed. The split boulder, the dead hemlock that looks like a giant claw, the meadow where I'd seen a black bear once from a safe distance. I was making good time, feeling strong, enjoying the solitude. There were no other cars at the trailhead when I'd arrived, which wasn't unusual for this late in the season. Most people don't want to hike Dolly Sods after October. Too unpredictable. The trail markers in Dolly Sods are yellow blazes painted on trees. Pretty standard. I'd been following them on autopilot, barely even thinking about it because I knew this route so well. But around mile 3, I noticed something odd. There was a blaze on a tree that I didn't remember. Not just a tree I'd forgotten about, but a blaze that looked wrong. Too bright, too perfectly painted, like it had been done yesterday. Everything else about the trail looked right. The terrain, the vegetation, the general direction. Just that one marker seemed off. I checked my GPS watch. It showed me right where I should be, moving along the trail at a steady pace. I shrugged it off and kept going. But then I saw another new marker. And another. Within 15 minutes, I realized I was following blazes I'd never seen before, and they were leading me away from my usual route. Here's the thing. I should have stopped right there. I should have turned around and backtracked to the last marker I recognized. That's basic hiking safety, the kind of thing you learn on your first day. But these new markers were leading me in what felt like the right direction. They were taking me north-northeast, which is where the trail should go at that point. My internal compass said I was fine. My gut said, keep moving. So I did. For the next hour, I followed these blazes deeper into terrain that felt familiar but looked increasingly wrong. I'd pass. A rock formation that I swore I recognized, but it would be on the wrong side of the trail. Or I'd see a distinctive tree, but the trail would curve away from it when I knew it should curve toward it. Little things, small enough that I kept telling myself I was just remembering incorrectly. My GPS watch started acting strange around mile 5. The distance would jump forward, then back, then forward again. 1 minute it would show I'd hiked 5.2 miles. The next it would drop to 4.7, then leap to 6.1. The elevation data was even worse, showing me climbing and descending hundreds of feet over terrain that was clearly flat. That's when I should have stopped. That's when every alarm bell in my head should have been ringing loud enough to send me straight back to my car. But I didn't stop, because the trail markers kept appearing, regular as a heartbeat, bright yellow blazes leading me forward. And some stupid, stubborn part of my brain insisted that if I just kept following them, they'd connect back to the main trail eventually. I pulled out my phone to check my GPS app, the one I keep as a backup. No signal, which wasn't surprising. But the GPS itself wasn't working either. The map showed my location markers spinning in circles, unable to lock onto satellites. I stood there for 5 minutes, holding my phone up, turning in slow circles, watching that blue dot spin uselessly on the screen. The forest had gotten quieter. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but wrong. The birds had stopped singing. No breeze moved through the trees. Just my footsteps and my breathing, and this creeping sense that the woods were holding their breath. I started walking faster, still following the blazes, because what else was I going to do? The trail began to slope uphill, which was wrong because I should have been on relatively flat terrain for another 2 miles at least. But I climbed anyway, my breathing getting harder, my legs starting to burn. The blazes kept appearing every 100 feet or so, reassuring and terrible at the same time. At the top of the hill, I found myself in a meadow I'd never seen before. Not just a meadow I'd forgotten about, but one that shouldn't exist. Dolly Sods has plenty of open areas, but they're all mapped and marked, and I knew every single one on this trail system. This meadow wasn't on any map. It was roughly circular, maybe 200 feet across, ringed by spruce trees that looked half dead. In the center was a pile of rocks, stacked deliberately, like a cairn, but bigger and older. The trail blazes led right to it, right to the center of the meadow, right to that pile of rocks, and then they just stopped. No blazes leading out the other side. No trail continuing. Nothing. I stood at the edge of that meadow for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My watch showed I'd been hiking for 4 hours. 4 hours to cover what should have been a 5-mile section of trail. That was impossible. I'm not fast, but I'm not that slow, either. I should have been near the halfway point of my loop, approaching the ridge where you can see into Maryland on clear days. I walked to the rock pile and examined it. The stones were covered in lichen, clearly old, arranged in a loose spiral pattern that got taller toward the center. At the base, someone had carved symbols into the largest rocks. Not recent carvings, but old ones, worn down by weather. I didn't recognize them as any language or marking system I knew. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the symbols. Maybe someone online could identify them. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of this. But even as I was thinking that, I knew it was wrong. I knew this meadow shouldn't be here, and those symbols were older than any map of Dolly Sods, and something had deliberately led me to this spot. I looked back toward the tree line where I'd entered. The forest looked darker now, even though it was only early afternoon. The spruce trees seemed closer than they had been a moment ago. And I realized with absolute certainty that if I didn't move right now, I wasn't going to leave this meadow. I picked a direction opposite from where I'd entered and started walking, not running, just moving with purpose. No trail, no blazes, just straight through the spruce and back into the hardwood forest beyond. Branches scraped my face and arms. My pack caught on deadfall. I pushed through anyway, checking my compass every few minutes to make sure I was heading generally south, toward where the trailhead should be. For 2 hours, I navigated by compass and terrain, ignoring my malfunctioning GPS, trusting my sense of direction more than any technology. The sun was getting lower. My water was running out. But I kept moving, kept pushing through the undergrowth, refusing to stop or second-guess myself. Then suddenly, I broke through a line of trees and found myself standing in the parking lot at Bear Rock's trailhead. My car was right there, exactly where I'd left it 20 feet away. I was back. I stood there, gasping, trying to understand what had just happened. I checked my watch. It showed 4:47 p.m. I'd started hiking at 9:15 a.m., 7.5 hours, for a hike that should have taken me 5 hours total, and I'd barely made it a third of the way through the loop. My car was covered in a thin layer of frost that definitely hadn't been there when I'd left it. The windows were completely opaque with ice crystals, even though the day had been mild. I looked around the parking lot. Still no other vehicles. Still alone. I got in my car and just sat there for 20 minutes, heat blasting, watching the frost melt from the windshield. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key in the ignition on the first 3 tries. When I finally started the engine and pulled out my phone, I had a dozen missed calls and twice as many texts, all from Camilla. The first text had come at 11:00 a.m. Hope you're having a good hike. Normal. Friendly. The text got progressively more worried as the day went on. By 3 p.m., she was threatening to call search and rescue. Her last text, sent at 4:30, said she'd already called the state police and they were sending a ranger to look for me. I called her immediately. She answered before the first ring finished. "Oh my God, Maisie, where the hell have you been? They're about to send a search team into Dolly Sods." "I'm fine," I said, my voice sounding weird and distant to my own ears. "I'm at the trailhead. I'm fine." "You've been gone for almost 8 hours. Your itinerary said 5 hours max. I've been losing my mind." 8 hours. She said 8 hours, but my watch showed 4:47, and I left at 9:15. That was only... I did the math in my head. 7.5 hours, not 8. "What time is it?" I asked. "It's 5:15. Jesus, Maisie, what happened out there?" 5:15. My watch said 4:47. I stared at the dashboard clock in my car. It agreed with Camilla. 5:15 p.m. I'd lost time. Not just the hours wandering in circles following impossible trail markers, but actual time that my watch hadn't recorded. 28 minutes that had just disappeared. I ended up talking to a ranger for an hour, explaining what had happened. I expected him to look at me like I was crazy or lying, but he just nodded with this weary expression, like he'd heard it all before. When I finished, he handed me a business card with a number written on the back in pen. "You're the third person this season," he said quietly. "Third person who's followed markers that shouldn't be there and ended up somewhere they've never seen before. Other two said they lost time. One of them came out 3 days after she went in, but her watch showed she'd only been gone 6 hours." "What is it?" I asked. "What's happening out there?" He shook his head. "I've been working this area for 15 years. Some places in these mountains don't follow normal rules. Dolly Sods is one of them. You did the right thing by trusting your compass and not trying to find your way back the way you came. Last person who tried to retrace their steps. Well, we're still looking for him. That was 2 years ago. The pictures I took of those symbols didn't come out. Every single photo was corrupted, just gray static. My phone was fine before and after, but those specific images wouldn't load. I tried everything to recover them. Nothing worked. I still think about that meadow, about those symbols, and the impossible trail markers, and the 28 minutes I can't account for. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still there, walking in circles around that rock pile, and this version of me that made it back is just wishful thinking. Sometimes I check my watch obsessively, making sure time is passing the way it should. I bought new hiking boots last week. They're sitting in my closet, still in the box. I tell myself I'll go back out there eventually, try a different trail system, somewhere safer. But every weekend comes and I find excuses. Maybe I'll never go back. Maybe that's fine. Maybe some people aren't meant to know what's really out there in those old mountains, waiting in the places where the maps end and the trail markers lead somewhere they shouldn't. Thanks for listening, horror family. Make sure you're subscribed to Haunted Fears. We've got 9 more encounters coming your way. I heard my grandfather calling my name from inside a mine that's been sealed since 1976, the year he died in the collapse. The thing is, he wasn't just calling, he was begging me to let him out. My name is Everin, and I'm what you'd call Lynch, Kentucky born and raised. 3rd generation coal country, though I never went into the mines myself. Got a job at the hardware store in town, married a girl from Harlan, living a quiet life. But my grandfather Mordecai, he spent 32 years underground before the Lynch Mine No. 7 took him and 12 other men on a Tuesday morning in March of '76. I was only 2 years old when it happened, so I never really knew him except through stories my grandmother told before she passed last year. After her funeral, I started going through old family papers and found a map my grandfather had drawn of the mine entrances around Lynch. Most of them are sealed now, concrete and rebar, big warning signs from the state. But there was one entrance he'd marked with a red X and written original shaft, blocked 1952 next to it. Something about that notation stuck with me. If it was blocked in 1952, why would he still have it marked on a map he was updating as late as 1975? It took me 3 weeks to work up the nerve to go look for it. I convinced my cousin Xavier to come with me on a Saturday in July, told him we were just going to see if we could find it, maybe take some pictures for the family history. Xavier's younger than me, 23 to my 31, and he's always been the adventurous type. He thought it sounded interesting, a way to connect with family legacy. The location on the map led us about 2 miles outside of Lynch, up an old logging road that's mostly grown over now. It was a hot day, mid-80s, sun beating down through the trees. We parked Xavier's truck and hiked maybe half a mile through thick brush before we found it. The entrance wasn't what I expected. Instead of a modern concrete seal like the other mines around here, this was just a rough wooden framework. Old boards nailed across a dark opening in the hillside. The boards were weathered gray, some of them rotting, and there were gaps wide enough to see into the darkness beyond. A rusty chain-link fence had been erected around it at some point, but that was falling apart too, posts leaning at angles. "This is it?" Xavier asked, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in decades." I checked the map again. This was definitely the spot my grandfather had marked. I stepped closer to the boarded entrance, and that's when I noticed the water. There was rust-colored water pooling at the base of the boards, seeping out from inside the mine. It had stained the ground orange and brown, creating a small stream that trickled down the hillside. "Mine drainage," I said. "Common around here. The old shafts flood over time." We stood there for a few minutes, just looking at it. I was about to suggest we head back when I heard it. A sound from inside the mine, not wind, not water dripping, but the distinct metallic ring of a pickaxe striking rock, clear as day. Then another strike, and another. A rhythm, like someone was working in there. Xavier heard it too. "What the hell is that?" The pickaxe sounds continued, echoing out through the gaps in the boards. Then voices. Multiple voices talking to each other, too muffled to make out words, but definitely human. Men's voices, conversational, like workers on a break. "There can't be anyone in there," Xavier said, but he didn't sound convinced. "This mine's been sealed for over 70 years. The voices got louder, more distinct. I could almost make out words now, fragments of conversation, things about shift changes and equipment, the kind of talk miners would have. And then one voice rose above the others, older, with a slight accent I recognized from the one recording my grandmother had kept. "We need help down here. The fire's still burning." It was my grandfather's voice. I'd heard it maybe 50 times from that union meeting recording, the way he pronounced his vowels, that distinctive cadence. It was him. "We've been waiting so long. Someone has to let us out." I took a step back, my heart pounding. Xavier grabbed my arm. "That sounded like—" "It's not possible," I said, but my voice came out as a whisper. "Please," my grandfather's voice again coming from deep inside the sealed mine. "We've been down here since the collapse. Help us." Other voices joined in. Different voices. All men, all talking at once now. I couldn't make out individual words anymore. Just this chorus of pleading, begging, overlapping each other. They were asking for help, asking to be freed, describing the darkness and the heat. Xavier was backing away, his face pale. This isn't right. But I couldn't move. I was staring at those gaps between the boards, trying to see into the darkness. The pickaxe sounds had stopped. Now there was just the voices and another sound underneath them. Footsteps. Multiple people walking, getting closer to the entrance. "They're coming toward us," Xavier said, his voice shaking. I took another step closer instead. I don't know why. Some part of me needed to understand what was happening. The voices were louder now, more desperate. My grandfather's voice rose above the others. The collapse, it didn't kill us right away. We waited. We waited so long for someone to dig us out. Why didn't anyone come? 49 years we've been waiting. 49 years. 1976 to now, 2025. The math was right, but they couldn't have survived down there. The official report said the collapse killed everyone instantly. That's what they told the families. That's what they told my grandmother. I reached out toward the boards, my hand trembling. The moment my fingers got within a few inches of the wood, I felt heat. Not the July sun heat, but something else. Like putting your hand near a furnace. The boards were radiating warmth, getting hotter the closer I got. "Don't touch it," Xavier warned, but I was already pulling my hand back. That's when I smelled it. Coal dust and old timber. But underneath that, something else. Smoke. Not fresh smoke, but the smell of a fire that had burned itself out a long time ago. And something worse. Something organic and wrong that I didn't want to identify. The fire is still burning down here. My grandfather's voice was right on the other side of the boards now, so close I could hear his breathing. Ragged, labored breathing. "It's so hot. Please, just pull away the boards. Just a few. We can fit through. We can finally get out." My grandmother had told me how he died. The collapse triggered a fire in a coal seam. The smoke killed them before the rescue crews could reach them. That was the official story. But standing there, hearing my grandfather's voice, feeling the heat coming from that sealed entrance, I started to doubt everything I'd been told. "How do I know it's really you?" I asked, my voice cracking. Silence for a moment. Then, "You were born October 17th at Lynch General Hospital, 6:42 in the morning. I was in the waiting room. I bought you a silver rattle with your name engraved on it. Your grandmother kept it in her jewelry box. She died last August." The rattle was real. I'd found it when going through her things. And she died in August, just like he said. Information no one else would know. "We can prove it," another voice said, younger than my grandfather's. "We can tell you things only we would know. About the mine, about that day, about what really happened. But you have to help us first. You have to let us out." Xavier was pulling on my shoulder now, trying to get me to move. "Something's not right about this. We should go." But I couldn't. If there was even a chance that my grandfather and those men had been trapped down there, suffering for 49 years, waiting for someone to find them, how could I just walk away? "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "The boards," my grandfather said. "They're old, rotted. You can pull them away. Just enough for us to get through. Please. I never got to know you. I never got to see you grow up. Don't leave me down here." I stepped forward, reaching for the nearest board. It was hot to the touch, almost too hot to hold, but I gripped it anyway. The wood felt soft, pulpy. I pulled, and it started to come away from the frame with a wet tearing sound. That's when Xavier really grabbed me, both hands on my shoulders. "Look at the water." I looked down. The rust-colored water seeping from the mine entrance was moving wrong, not flowing downhill like water should, but spreading outward, pooling around our feet. And in the bright sunlight, I could see it wasn't just rusty water. It was thick, viscous, dark red mixing with orange and brown. The smell hit me then, fully and completely. Not smoke, not coal dust. Decay. Death. Old death that had been sealed away for almost 50 years. "Don't stop now." My grandfather's voice was different now, harder, more insistent. "You're so close. Just pull away one more board. That's all we need." But I could see through the gap I'd made now, see into the darkness, and there were shapes in there, man-shaped but wrong, moving wrong, standing in ways people shouldn't be able to stand. I let go of the board and stepped back slowly, almost tripping over Xavier. The voices from inside the mine changed, not pleading anymore, angry. A dozen voices talking over each other, some cursing, some still begging, some just making sounds that didn't resemble human speech anymore. We didn't run. We walked backward, keeping our eyes on that entrance, watching those shapes move behind the boards. We walked all the way back to the truck like that, neither of us willing to turn our backs on what was in that mine. When we finally got in the truck, Xavier just sat there gripping the steering wheel, not starting the engine. What was that? I don't know. That was your grandfather's voice. How did it know all that stuff about your family? I don't know. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes before he finally started the truck. Neither of us spoke on the drive back. My hands were blistered where I'd gripped the hot board. We didn't talk about what to do next. What could we do? That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been back. Haven't reported it to anyone. What would I even say? But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. I've been driving past the Lynch General Store every day for work, and there's a bulletin board there where people post community notices. Yesterday, someone put up a flyer, handwritten in shaky letters. Help, trapped in mine, number 7, been waiting 49 years. Someone knows where. Tell them to come back. No signature, just those words. And underneath, in smaller letters, the fire is spreading. I took the flyer down, but this morning there was another one. Same message, same handwriting. And Xavier called me this afternoon, said he's been hearing things at night. Through his walls, through his pipes. Men talking, asking about the mine, asking when we're coming back. I don't know what's in that mine. I don't know if it's really my grandfather and those men, or something else wearing their voices. But whatever it is, it knows about me. It knows my family history, and it's not going to stop asking. Every night I lie awake wondering if I should go back, if I should try to help them, or if opening that mine would be the worst mistake anyone could make. The flyer appeared again today. This time it was on my truck windshield. I didn't put my truck anywhere near that general store. Thanks for staying with us, horror family. Subscribe to Haunted Fears for more encounters from deep in Appalachia. Something's been following me through these mountains for 3 days, and I only know because it keeps appearing in my photos. Each picture I take, it gets closer, and in the last one, it was standing right behind me. My name is Michaela, and I'm a nature photographer from Asheville. I've been doing this professionally for about 6 years now, mostly magazine work and stock photography, nothing fancy. I make enough to cover rent and keep my equipment updated, and I get to spend most of my time outdoors, which is all I really wanted from life. In October, I usually head out to Linville Gorge in North Carolina to catch the autumn colors at their peak. It's some of the most dramatic landscape on the East Coast, and if you time it right, you can get shots that sell for decent money. This year, I planned a 4-day solo trip. I do a lot of solo work. It's easier than coordinating with other people, and I can move at my own pace, wait for the perfect light, camp wherever the shots are best. My boyfriend Kingsley wasn't thrilled about me going alone, but he knows better than to argue with me about my work. I'm careful. I file my itinerary. I carry a satellite communicator. I know what I'm doing out there. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the low 60s, and the leaves were at that peak moment where every tree looks like it's on fire. I hiked into the gorge along the Babel Tower Trail, found a good spot near some rock formations, and spent the afternoon shooting. I got maybe 200 shots, and when I reviewed them that evening at my campsite, I was thrilled. These were portfolio quality, possibly even gallery quality if I printed them right. That's when I noticed it. In one of the photos, taken around 3 p.m. near a distinctive rock outcropping, there was a figure in the background. Way back in the tree line, maybe 100 yards behind where I'd been standing. Just a dark silhouette, human-shaped, standing perfectly still among the autumn colors. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day, and I definitely hadn't noticed anyone in that spot when I was shooting. I figured it was just another hiker, someone who happened to be in frame. It happens. You can't control who walks through your shots when you're working in public wilderness. I made a mental note to crop it out in post-processing, and didn't think much more about it. The second day, I hiked deeper into the gorge, following a route that would take me to some waterfalls I wanted to photograph. It was another beautiful day, slightly cooler, with some high clouds that created interesting light. I shot all morning, changing locations every hour or so, working my way along the trail system. That night, reviewing my photos, I saw the figure again, in multiple shots, different locations, different times of day, but always in the background. Always that same dark silhouette, standing motionless, watching. In one photo taken at 11 a.m., it was visible on a ridge maybe 200 yards away. In another from 2 p.m. at a completely different location 3 miles down the trail, it was visible through a gap in the trees, same distance, same posture. That was wrong. No one hikes that slowly. No one just stands in one spot for hours at a time. And no one could have gotten from that first location to the second without me seeing them on the trail. There was only one path connecting those areas. I zoomed in on the photos, trying to get a better look at the figure, but it was always too far away, too obscured by trees or landscape. Just a human-shaped shadow that showed up in my shots, but never in my actual field of vision while I was shooting. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept my headlamp on in my tent and checked my satellite communicator every hour to make sure it was working. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably just coincidence, or maybe a trick of the light creating shapes in the trees that looked like a person. Digital cameras can do weird things with shadows and contrast. Day 3. I almost packed up and headed home that morning, but I'd planned this trip for months. I'd hiked all the way into the gorge, and I had one more location I really wanted to shoot, an overlook where you can see the entire gorge laid out below you, especially dramatic in the late afternoon light. I hiked out to the overlook, got there around 1 p.m., and set up my gear. The view was even better than I'd hoped. I spent 3 hours there, shooting from every angle, playing with different exposures and compositions. I was so focused on the work that I almost forgot about the figure in my photos. Almost. When I finally packed up my camera around 4 p.m. and started reviewing the day's shots on my camera's display screen, my hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the camera. The figure was in every single photo, every single one, and it was getting closer. In the first shot, taken at 1:15 p.m., it was visible at the far edge of the gorge, maybe half a mile away, just a dark spot against the autumn forest. By 1:45 p.m., it was closer, perhaps a quarter mile. At 2:30 p.m., I could make out that it was definitely human-shaped, standing on an outcropping of rock across from my position. At 3:15 p.m., it was close enough that I should have been able to see it with my naked eye, standing on the same ridge I was on maybe 300 feet away. At 3:47 p.m., according to the timestamp, it was 50 feet behind me. I could see details now. Tall, wearing dark clothes, completely motionless. The angle of the shot meant I'd been pointing my camera away from it, capturing the gorge view, but it had captured part of the cliff area behind me in the frame. The final photo, taken at 4:02 p.m., was a shot I'd taken of my camera bag and tripod, just a quick reference shot so I'd remember my setup for this location. In the background of that photo, barely in frame, was the figure. It was standing less than 20 feet behind where I'd been sitting, close enough that I could see it was wearing some kind of old-fashioned dark clothing. Close enough that I could see its hands hanging at its sides. Close enough that if I'd turned around, I would have been face to face with it. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't seen it. I'd been alone on that overlook for 3 hours, or at least I thought I'd been alone. I packed up my gear methodically, the way I always do. Lens cap on, camera in the bag, tripod collapsed and secured. My hands were steady even though my heart was pounding. Years of professional work had taught me to function even when I was scared or uncomfortable. I'd photographed in storms, on cliff edges, in situations where one wrong move could ruin expensive equipment. This was just another situation that required focus. I started hiking back toward my campsite at my normal pace. The trail was narrow here, cut into the side of the gorge, with steep drops on one side and rock wall on the other. I kept my movements deliberate, careful with my footing, Every few minutes, I stopped, set up my camera, and took a photo of the trail behind me. Just aimed the camera back down the path and clicked. I didn't take time to compose or focus properly, just pointed and shot. When I reviewed those photos, the figure was in every one, following me. The first photo showed it back at the overlook where I'd been. The second photo, taken 5 minutes later, showed it on the trail behind me, maybe 100 yards back. The third photo, it had closed the distance to 50 yards. It was following me, and it was getting closer, and I could only see it through my camera. I kept walking at the same measured pace, stopping every few minutes to document. 30 yards behind me in the next shot. Close enough now that I could see its face, or at least where its face should be. The image was slightly blurred, but I could make out enough detail to know that something was very wrong. The proportions weren't quite right. The way it stood wasn't quite right. 20 yards in the next photo. I could see in the image that it wasn't walking the way people walk. Its legs moved wrong, like it was gliding more than stepping. I made it back to my campsite just as the light was fading. I took one more photo before I went to my tent. 15 yards away now, standing at the edge of the clearing where I'd set up camp. I could see it clearly in the photo, see the wrongness of it, see how it was watching me. I went into my tent, zipped it closed, and sat there with my camera in my lap. I took photos through the tent fabric every few minutes, pointing the camera at where I thought the entrance was. In most of them, I could see the silhouette outside, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always there. Circling, waiting. I didn't sleep. I sat there all night, taking photos every 10 minutes, documenting whatever was outside my tent. When dawn came, I packed up everything in the gray morning light. I took one final photo before I left the campsite. The figure was standing exactly where my tent had been, in the photo, as if it had been waiting for me to move. The hike out took 3 hours. I stopped every half mile to take a photo behind me. It followed me the entire way, maintaining the same distance now, about 20 yards back. Never closer, never further, just following. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I loaded my gear, got in, and locked the doors. I took one last photo through the rear window. It was standing at the edge of the parking lot just inside the tree line, watching me leave. I drove straight through to Asheville. Didn't stop except for gas. I kept my camera on the passenger seat, and at every red light, I took a photo of the road behind me. Nothing showed up in those photos. Whatever it was, it had stayed in the gorge. I didn't look at the rest of my photos until 2 days later, after I'd slept for 16 hours straight. I downloaded all the photos to my computer and started going through them chronologically. The figure was in 127 out of 583 photos. Always in the background, always watching, progressively getting closer over the 3 days. Then I got to the last photo on the memory card, the one I didn't remember taking. The timestamp said 4:47 p.m. on day 3, between my last intentional shot at the overlook and my first photo documenting the trail behind me. The photo was dark, slightly out of focus, like it had been taken while the camera was moving, but I could see what it showed. It was a shot of me. My back, my camera bag, my ponytail. I was standing at the overlook, looking out at the gorge, completely unaware. The angle suggested the photo had been taken from about 10 feet behind me. Something had taken a photo of me with my own camera. I checked the GPS data embedded in the image file. The coordinates placed it at the overlook, exactly where I'd been standing when I was reviewing my photos, and first realized the figure was getting closer. While I was looking at my camera screen, something had been close enough to take the camera from my hands, photograph me, and return it without me noticing. I deleted everything: memory card, computer, cloud backup. I went through every device I own and made sure no copies existed anywhere. But I remember that photo. I remember seeing myself from behind, unaware and vulnerable, photographed by something that had been following me for 3 days. I remember knowing that while I was documenting it, it was documenting me. While I thought I was the observer, I was also being observed. I haven't been back to Linville Gorge. I'm still taking photos, but not alone anymore. I bring Kingsley with me, or other photographers, never solo. And I don't review my photos in the field anymore. I wait until I'm home, until I'm somewhere safe with other people around. Sometimes I still go through my published work from before that trip, photos I took months or years ago in other locations. I zoom in on the backgrounds, examining every shadow, every dark space between trees, looking for a figure that shouldn't be there. So far, I haven't found anything, but I keep checking. The thing is, I can't stop wondering, was it only following me during those 3 days in Linville Gorge? Or had it been following me longer, appearing in photos I'd taken and deleted without noticing, watching me from backgrounds I'd cropped out or overlooked? And if I stopped going into the wilderness, if I stopped giving it opportunities to appear in my photos, would it find other ways to show me it was there? Last week, Kingsley took a photo of me at a restaurant with his phone. Just a casual shot, me smiling at the table. When he showed it to me, I looked at the background, at the other diners, at the windows showing the street outside. Nothing. Just normal people, normal scenery. But there was a mirror on the wall behind me, visible in the frame. And in that mirror's reflection, behind my reflection, there was something standing in a space where no one should have been. Just a dark shape, human-sized, watching. I didn't tell Kingsley. I just asked him to delete the photo, said I didn't like how I looked. He thought I was being vain. He doesn't know that I've started to understand something terrible. Whatever followed me in Linville Gorge, it didn't stay there. It found another way into my life. And every photo anyone takes of me is another chance for me to see it getting closer. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 9 more stories from the mountains are coming. 7 nights in a row, I watched campfires appear in a perfect grid across the forest, where no trails exist. Tonight is the 8th night, and the fires are forming a path that leads straight to my tower. My name is Shlomo, and I'm a fire lookout for the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. I work the Catawba Fire Tower, which sits at about 4,000 feet elevation, giving me a 360-degree view of roughly 40 square miles of wilderness. It's a lonely job, especially during the overnight shifts in late fall when most of the seasonal tourists have gone home, and it's just me, the radio, and whatever wildlife decides to make noise in the dark. I've been doing this for 3 seasons now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Weather events, lost hikers, illegal campers, the occasional black bear wandering too close to the tower base. But nothing prepared me for what started happening last Tuesday. I came on shift at 6 p.m., right as the sun was setting. November in the Smokies means early darkness, and by 6:30 I was relying on my equipment and the moonlight to see anything. The first few hours were routine. I logged weather conditions every hour, monitored the radio traffic from other towers and ranger stations, ate my dinner, read a book, standard procedure for a quiet night. Around 10 p.m. I saw the first fire. It appeared suddenly in my southwest quadrant, maybe 3 miles out. Just a small point of orange light against the dark forest. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the area. Definitely a campfire. And it was in a section of forest where there are no established campsites, no trails, nothing but dense hardwood forest and steep terrain that most hikers avoid. Illegal camping isn't uncommon, but it's my job to report it. I marked the location on my map, noted the coordinates, and radioed it in to the ranger station. They logged it and said they'd send someone out in the morning to investigate. I kept watching the fire through my binoculars. It burned steady and bright, and I could see what looked like a figure standing next to it. Just standing there, motionless, facing my direction. 20 minutes later, another fire appeared. This one was in my west quadrant, also about 3 miles out, also in terrain with no trails or official camping areas. I radioed it in, marked it on my map. Through the binoculars, I could see another figure standing beside this fire. Same posture, same stillness. Then another fire appeared to the north. Then another to the northwest. By midnight, I'd counted 8 fires, all roughly the same distance from my tower, all in locations where people shouldn't be camping. When I plotted them on my map, they formed a rough semicircle around the tower, each fire evenly spaced from the next. The ranger station told me they'd investigate in the morning, but they sounded skeptical. 8 separate camping parties, all choosing illegal sites, all lighting fires at roughly the same time. It didn't make sense. They asked if I was sure about the locations, suggested maybe I was seeing the same fire from different angles as I rotated in the tower. I wasn't. I know my sight lines. I know my quadrants. These were 8 distinct fires. I stayed up all night watching them. They burned steadily until dawn, never growing larger or smaller, never moving. The figures beside them never sat down, never moved, just stood facing my tower. When the sun came up, I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a better look at the locations in daylight. Dense forest, steep hillsides, nothing remarkable. And no smoke, no evidence of fires that had burned all night. The rangers went out to investigate 3 of the locations that morning. They radioed back around noon. No fire rings, no disturbed ground, no evidence anyone had been there at all. They suggested I'd been seeing reflections, maybe lights from distant roads or houses catching on wet leaves or something. But there are no roads in those areas, no houses, just wilderness. I almost believed them, almost convinced myself I'd imagined it or misidentified what I was seeing. Then the second night came. Same thing. 8 fires, same locations, appearing between 10 p.m. and midnight. Same figures standing beside them, motionless, facing the tower. I documented everything this time, took photos with my phone through the binoculars, recorded exact times and coordinates. The photos showed the orange points of light against the darkness, but they were too far away for any detail. Just dots of fire where fire shouldn't be. Third night. 8 fires again, same pattern. The ranger station was getting annoyed with my reports. They suggested I might need a break. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. They offered to send someone up to cover my shift. I refused. I needed to understand what was happening. Fourth night. 10 fires. The pattern had expanded. 2 new fires appeared in positions that filled gaps in the semicircle. Now the ring was more complete, more deliberate. And the figures were clearer through my binoculars now, detailed enough that I could see they were wearing what looked like old clothing, dark and shapeless. They never moved, just stood and watched my tower. Fifth night. 12 fires. The semicircle was nearly complete now, with only the eastern quadrant remaining empty. That's the side where the access road comes up to the tower, the only way in or out by vehicle. Everything else was surrounded. I called my supervisor that night, told him I was seeing something wrong, something deliberately patterned. He listened to my whole report, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Shlomo, we need to talk about the history of that tower." Turns out, back in 1952, there was a fire lookout named Ira who worked Catawba Tower. During a particularly bad fire season, he reported seeing lights in the forest one night. Lots of them, in a pattern. He kept reporting them night after night, insisted they were coordinated, said they were watching him. After a week, he stopped answering radio calls. Rangers hiked up to check on him and found the tower empty. Ira was gone. His gear was still there. His logbook was still there. Even his coffee mug was still on the desk. But Ira was never found. They shut down the tower for 2 years after that, my supervisor said. Didn't want to spook anyone. But when they reopened it, everything was fine. No reports of anything unusual for decades. Until now. Sixth night. 14 fires. The semicircle was complete except for a narrow gap where the access road cut through. The figures were close enough now that I could see they weren't moving, like living people even when they shifted position. They flickered, like the fires themselves, there and not there. I started going through the old logbooks stored in the tower, looking for Ira's entries from 1952. I found them in a water-stained notebook at the bottom of a filing cabinet. His handwriting started neat and professional, logging weather and fire conditions. But as the days went on, the entries got more erratic. Day 4, 16 fires tonight. They're getting brighter. I can see the people now. They're not right. Day 6, 20 fires. They're closing in. Why won't anyone come check on me? Day 7, the fires are moving. They're building a path. I think they want me to come down. The final entry was dated October 18th, 1952. Day 8. The path is complete. It leads from the tower to the center of the circle. I can see what's waiting there now. I don't want to go down, but I don't think I have a choice anymore. If someone finds this, don't come up here during fire season. Don't watch the fires. They watch back. I checked today's date, November 12th. I'd been seeing the fires for 6 nights. Tonight would be the 7th night. I considered leaving, packing up my gear, and walking down the mountain before dark. But it's a 2-mile hike down a steep trail, and something told me that leaving the tower at night, walking through where those fires had been, was exactly what I shouldn't do. The tower was high, exposed, but it was also defensible. I could see in all directions. I could see them coming. 7th night started like the others. I came on shift at 6 p.m., logged the weather, tried to act like everything was normal. The sun set, darkness fell, and right at 10 p.m. the fires appeared. 16 of them now. The semicircle was complete, but now there were more fires inside the circle, creating a pattern I couldn't quite make sense of from above. Lines connecting, intersecting, forming something that looked almost like a map or diagram. And in the center of it all, about half a mile from the base of my tower, was a large fire, bigger than the others. The figures were everywhere now, dozens of them, standing by the fires. Through my binoculars, I could see them more clearly than ever before. They wore old-style work clothes, the kind fire lookouts would have worn in the 1950s, and they were all facing the tower, all perfectly still, all watching. Then they started moving, not walking, but repositioning, jumping from one spot to another like frames skipping in a film. Each time I looked away and looked back, they were closer, moving up the mountain toward the tower. The fires stayed where they were, but the figures were advancing. I radioed the ranger station. I need someone up here, now. Something's happening. Static. Then a voice I didn't recognize. They're already there, Shlomo. Look closer. I spun around, checking all my quadrants. The figures had reached the base of my tower, dozens of them, standing in a circle around the foundation looking up at me. They were close enough now that I didn't need binoculars. Close enough that I could see their faces. They didn't have faces. Just smooth, dark spaces where faces should be, like looking into deep water at night. My radio crackled again. The same unfamiliar voice. Come down, Shlomo. Walk the path. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. I looked at the fire pattern in the distance. From my elevated position, I could see what it formed now. A path, just like Ira had written, leading from the center fire to my tower, marked by smaller fires on either side like runway lights. An invitation, or a summons. What happened to Ira? I asked into the radio, not expecting an answer. Ira's down here, the voice said. He's been waiting. We've all been waiting. Every 7 years, the fires come back. Every 7 years, someone watches. And every 7 years, someone walks down. I did the math. 1952, 1959, 1966, right on through to 2025. Every 7 years. The figures at the base of my tower started to climb. I could hear them on the metal stairs, dozens of footsteps that shouldn't exist, getting closer. I backed away from the windows, into the center of the small tower cab. There's nowhere to go. The tower is 10 stories high, but it's just a small room at the top, with windows on all sides and one door leading to the stairway. They reached the door. I could see them through the window, crowded on the platform, those empty faces pressed against the glass. The door handle started to turn. I grabbed my phone, typed out this message. I don't know if anyone will get it. I don't know if it matters. But if you're reading this and you're thinking about taking a job as a fire lookout in Cherokee National Forest, in Catawba Tower specifically, don't. Find another tower. Find another job. Find another life. Because tonight is the 8th night, and I understand now what Ira understood. The fires aren't coming from the forest. They're leading to something in the forest. Something that's been waiting for 73 years for its pattern to complete. And that pattern needs someone in this tower to walk down and meet it. The door is opening. The figures are coming in. They're not angry or threatening. They're just empty, waiting, expecting me to follow. I can see the path clearly now from the window. All those fires burning in perfect alignment, leading to that central bonfire where something is waiting. Something I can almost see in the flames. Something shaped like all the lookouts who came before, who walked down and never came back. I'm not going to walk down. I'm going to stay in this tower. I'm going to sit here and wait for morning and hope that daylight makes them disappear like it has every other night. But I don't think it will, because it's the 8th night, and the pattern is complete. If someone finds this phone, if someone comes looking for me, don't stay here after dark. Don't watch the fires. They watch back. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 8 more stories from the mountains are waiting. We passed the same scarecrow 5 times on different roads, and each time it was in a different position. By the 3rd pass, it was reaching toward our car. My name is Harley, and my husband Alden and I were supposed to have a nice, quiet weekend in West Virginia. We'd heard about the Paw Paw Festival, this small-town celebration in a place called Paw Paw, population maybe 500 people, right on the Potomac River. It sounded charming. Local crafts, fruit tastings, live music, the kind of wholesome autumn activity that would make for good photos and give us a break from our jobs in D.C. We'd been working too hard, arguing too much, and we both thought a weekend away might help us remember why we got married in the first place. We left Friday afternoon, drove 3 hours west into the mountains. The festival wasn't until Saturday, but we'd booked a room at a bed and breakfast just outside town. The plan was to get there Friday evening, have a nice dinner, sleep in, then spend Saturday at the festival before driving home Sunday morning. Simple, relaxing, exactly what we needed. We should have turned around when we couldn't find the bed and breakfast. The address was clear on our confirmation email. 4 Sen 82 Mountain Laurel Road, Paw Paw, WV. We had GPS. We had the directions the owner had emailed us. We even had a paper map because cell service got spotty once we left the interstate. But when we got to where the bed and breakfast should have been, there was nothing there. Just an empty lot with overgrown grass and a rusted mailbox lying on its side. Maybe we took a wrong turn, Alden said, pulling out his phone. No signal. My phone showed the same, 1 bar that flickered to nothing whenever I tried to use it. We drove back toward the main road, looking for someone to ask for directions. That's when we saw the scarecrow. It was standing in a field to our right, one of those traditional autumn decorations, flannel shirt, overalls, burlap sack head with a painted face. Nothing unusual about it except that it seemed really well made, almost lifelike in its proportions. Its arms were outstretched in a classic scarecrow pose, and its head was tilted slightly, like it was watching the road. Cute, I said, barely paying attention. I was more focused on trying to get my phone to work. We drove for another 15 minutes, following what we thought was the route back to the main road. But somehow we ended up on a different road entirely, one that curved through dense forest. The trees were close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out most of the remaining daylight. This doesn't look right, I said. We didn't come this way. Alden was gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. I know, but the road has to connect to something. We'll hit the main route eventually. That's when we passed the scarecrow again. It was on the left side of the road this time, in a different field, but it was definitely the same one. Same flannel shirt with a red and black check pattern. Same overalls with the torn knee, same burlap face with that painted smile. But its arms were down now, hanging at its sides, and its head was turned fully toward the road, toward us. "Did we drive in a circle?" Alden asked. "I don't think so. We made all right turns." "Then how?" "I don't know. Just keep driving." The road continued through the forest, narrow and winding. The sun was setting now, and the shadows between the trees were getting deeper. We drove for another 20 minutes without seeing any houses, any intersections, any signs, just trees and the empty road and the growing darkness. Then we saw the scarecrow again. This time it was directly ahead, standing on the right shoulder of the road, maybe 50 yards in front of us. Its arms were reaching forward now, extended toward the road like it was trying to stop traffic. We had to slow down to drive past it, and as we did, I got a close look at the face. The paint was old and cracked, but the expression wasn't cheerful anymore. The smile looked wrong, too wide, the eyes too dark and hollow. "This is impossible," Alden said. His voice had an edge to it now, the frustration turning into something else. "We can't be passing the same scarecrow. Someone's moving it. Someone's messing with us." "Who?" "We haven't seen another car, another person, anything." "I don't know, Harley, but there has to be an explanation." We kept driving. The road eventually intersected with another road, and we turned left, hoping this would take us back to civilization. The darkness was almost complete now, and Alden turned on the headlights. The beams cut through the gloom, illuminating the forest and the road ahead. And there was the scarecrow, on the left side of the road this time, positioned at an intersection we were approaching. It was kneeling now, both knees on the ground, arms stretched forward, reaching. The burlap head was still turned toward us, watching us approach. "Stop the car," I said. "What?" "Stop the car. I want to see if it's real." Alden pulled over about 30 feet from the scarecrow. I got out of the car, leaving the door open, and walked slowly toward it. My phone was in my hand, flashlight turned on even though it barely helped. The thing was definitely physical. I could see the fabric of the shirt moving slightly in the breeze, could see the straw poking out from the cuffs. But something was wrong with it. The proportions were off, in a way I couldn't quite identify. Too tall, maybe, or the arms too long. And the way it was positioned, kneeling with its arms stretched out, it looked less like a decoration, and more like something begging or worshiping. I got within 10 feet of it and stopped. The face was worse up close. The painted smile had cracks running through it that looked almost like real lips, and the eyes, just holes cut in the burlap, seemed too deep, like they went further back than they should. "Harley, get back in." "The car!" Alden called from behind me. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the thing. When I was halfway back to the car, I could have sworn I saw its fingers twitch. I got in and slammed the door. "Drive." Alden didn't argue. He hit the gas and we sped past the scarecrow, not looking back. The road continued for another few miles before finally connecting to something that looked like a state route. There was a gas station at the intersection, its lights a welcome beacon in the darkness. We pulled in. The place looked old but open. Lights on inside, a few cars parked around back. Alden went in to ask for directions while I stayed in the car, trying to get my phone to connect to something, anything. Still no signal. Alden came back 5 minutes later, his face pale. "What?" I asked. "The guy in there got really weird when I mentioned the scarecrow." "Weird how?" I asked him if there was some kind of festival decoration thing going on, some tradition with scarecrows. He just stared at me for a minute, then asked what time it was. I said it was almost 8 o'clock. He got real serious and told me that if we're passing the same scarecrow on different roads, we need to drive straight through till sunrise. "What does that mean?" I asked him that. He wouldn't explain. He just kept saying, "Drive straight, don't stop till sunrise, don't circle back, don't try to find a place to stay around here. Just drive straight through to the interstate and keep going east." "That's insane. It's 3 hours back to D.C. We can't drive all night." He seemed pretty adamant about it, And there was something about the way he looked at me, Harley, like he was scared. Not of me, but for me. We sat there in the gas station parking lot, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to find a hotel, any hotel, spend the night, and drive home in the morning. But the guy's warning kept echoing in my head. Drive straight through till sunrise. Let's at least try to find the bed and breakfast again, I said. We paid for it. We might as well. No. Alden's voice was firm. That guy knew something, and I don't want to find out what happens if we don't listen. We pulled back onto the state route, heading east toward the interstate. The road was dark and empty, no other cars in sight. We drove in silence for a while, both of us tense, checking the roadsides for any sign of that scarecrow. 30 minutes later, we saw it again. It was standing on the right shoulder of the road, maybe 100 feet ahead. But it was different now. It was crawling. All 4 limbs on the ground, head raised, facing our direction, moving. We watched it move, watched it pull itself forward a few feet, straw falling from its sleeves, burlap head bobbing. "Oh, God," I said. "Oh, God, Alden, just drive past it. Don't stop. Don't slow down." He accelerated. We were doing 65 on a road probably meant for 45, but neither of us cared. As we passed the scarecrow, I looked at it through the window. It turned its head to follow our car, the movement smooth and deliberate. Not mechanical. Not like something blown by wind or shifting on a post. Like something watching. The road stretched ahead of us, dark and seemingly endless. We should have hit the interstate by now, but there were no signs, no indications of where we were. My phone was completely dead now. Not just without signal, but completely drained despite being at 60% battery when we'd left the gas station. "How much gas do we have?" I asked. Alden checked the gauge. "Half a tank. Enough to get home if we don't hit traffic." We drove for another hour. The road continued through dark forest, occasionally passing through small clearings, but never near any houses or buildings. No signs, no mile markers, nothing to tell us where we were. And every 15 or 20 minutes, we'd see the scarecrow again. Each time it was closer to the road. Each time it had moved in a way that was different from before. We saw it standing upright in a field, then hunched over near a fence, then on all fours at the road's edge, then standing right at the shoulder, like it was about to step into our lane. "It's hurting us," I said. "Every time we see it, we change direction slightly to avoid it. It's steering us somewhere." "That's not possible." "Alden, nothing about this is possible, but it's happening." The 7th time we saw it, it was standing in the middle of the road. Alden slammed on the brakes, and we skidded to a stop about 30 feet from it. The scarecrow was standing upright now, arms at its sides, head tilted at an angle that no scarecrow should be able to maintain. Behind it, the road continued into darkness. To our left and right, dense forest with no room to maneuver around it. We sat there, engine running, headlights illuminating the thing. It didn't move, just stood there, blocking our path. "Back up," I said. "Turn around. We'll find another road." Alden shifted into reverse and started backing up. We'd gone maybe 20 yards when I looked out the rear window and screamed. There was another scarecrow behind us, standing in the road blocking our escape route. Same flannel shirt, same overalls, same burlap face. Or maybe it was the same one that had somehow gotten behind us. I couldn't tell anymore. We were trapped between 2 scarecrows on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. "What do we do?" Alden's voice was shaking now. I looked at the scarecrow in front of us. It still hadn't moved, but as I watched, its arms began to rise, slowly, deliberately, lifting from its sides until they were stretched out to either side, like it was forming a T or blocking our path more completely. "Drive through it," I said. "What?" "It's just straw and fabric and sticks. Drive through it. Just hit it and keep going." "Harley, do it." Alden shifted back into drive and pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, closing the distance to the scarecrow in seconds. Right before impact, the thing's head turned to look directly at us through the windshield, and I saw that the holes where its eyes should be were not empty. There was something in there, something that gleamed in our headlights, something that looked wet and alive. We hit it going 40 miles per hour. The impact was wrong. Not the crunch of hitting straw and wood, but something softer, heavier. The scarecrow seemed to wrap around the hood of the car for a moment, its arms spreading across the windshield, burlap face pressed against the glass. I could see into those eye holes now, could see what was inside them, and I started screaming. Then it was gone. We were through it, past it, the road clear ahead. Alden was shaking so badly he could barely control the car, but he kept driving, kept the accelerator pressed down. I looked back through the rear window. Both scarecrows were standing in the road behind us now, side by side, arms reaching forward, growing smaller as we put distance between us and them. 10 minutes later, we saw lights ahead, real lights, street lights and buildings and cars parked in lots. We'd found civilization again, though I had no idea where. The first sign we passed said, "Welcome to Romney, WV. Population 1,048. We found a hotel and got a room. We didn't talk about what happened. We just locked the door, shoved furniture against it, and sat up all night with all the lights on. Every few minutes, one of us would check the window, looking out at the parking lot, making sure nothing was standing out there watching us. At sunrise, we got in the car and drove straight to D.C. We never went back for the bed and breakfast refund. We never reported what happened because how do you report something like that? But here's what bothers me most. 3 days after we got home, a package arrived at our house. No return address, just our names, an address in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single item wrapped in newspaper. It was a piece of burlap fabric, about 6 inches square. On it, someone had drawn 2 faces in paint, crude, simple faces with wide smiles and hollow eyes. Under the faces, written in the same paint, were 2 names, Harley and Alden. We burned it in our fireplace that night. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I pass those seasonal autumn displays that people put in their yards, those friendly scarecrows and harvest decorations, I look at them a little too long. I check to see if they're positioned differently when I drive past them again. I watch to see if they move, because I know now that some of them do, and I know that somewhere in West Virginia, there's a scarecrow that looks like it's wearing a flannel shirt with a red and black check pattern, standing in a field by a dark road, waiting for the next car to pass by 5 times. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 7 more stories from the mountains are waiting. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, no wind stirred the leaves. In that part of Joyce Kilmer Forest, it felt like something was watching, waiting for me to make a sound. My name is Zoya, and I work for a small conservation nonprofit based in North Carolina. We get grants to collect biodiversity samples, monitor tree health, and document environmental changes in old-growth forest regions. Most of my time is spent outdoors, and Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest is one of my favorite assignments. Ancient woods, some trees over 400 years old, the kind of place where time feels slow and the air is cool even in summer. Usually the forest is full of life. Birds, small animals, insects, 1,000 background noises that blend into comfort if you spend enough time out there. But last spring, during a routine survey, I found a patch where the forest had gone silent. Spring is the noisiest time in Joyce Kilmer. Migrating warblers fill the canopy. Frogs croak from every puddle, and there's a constant hum of bees among the wildflowers. I left the gravel parking lot with my sample kit, my hiking boots, a flask of coffee, and a GPS receiver I borrowed from the university. The air was thick with the scent of blooming rhododendron and rich brown earth. My job that day was straightforward. Mark a grid, collect soil samples, log fungus growth, and record animal activity at predetermined points. I started early, moving through familiar groves, the morning light slanting in green through the leaves. I paused at an old chestnut stump near a curve in Little Santitla Creek and took a sample, noting the stone markers left by earlier researchers and snapping photos of mushroom clusters. I whistled as I worked, like I always do. Music helps keep the bears away. The first few hours passed uneventfully, full of data. Birds calling, squirrels scolding, a box turtle crossing my path. Around noon, I reached my fourth survey point, a grove of poplar trees older than my grandmother. The temperature dropped suddenly, which seemed strange for the time of day. The birdsong faded, replaced by a thick, heavy quiet. I thought maybe I'd scared the wildlife off, so I sat down on a fallen log and waited. My experience told me that the forest always returns if you're patient, but after 20 minutes, nothing changed. No songbirds, no squirrels, not even the low hum of mosquitoes that usually hover near still water. It was as if sound itself had gone missing. I checked my GPS, made sure I hadn't wandered further than I meant to, and set about taking samples. My trowel hit the earth with a muffled thud, and even that noise felt wrong, too flat, as though the forest was swallowing up every vibration. I tried to record an audio file for my data notes, but when I played it back, it was just dead air, static, no environmental ambience, not even the sound of my voice. With each step, the sense of being watched grew stronger. Not the normal feeling of wildlife being curious, but a new, uncomfortable pressure like something large was standing just beyond my eyesight. I reminded myself that fear is just a trick of the mind out here, a way for evolution to keep us safe from predators. But I couldn't shake it. After 30 minutes in the silence, I decided to map the boundary of the quiet zone. I walked a careful grid, counting paces, marking trees, using fluorescent tape when I encountered the edge. The zone was nearly circular, maybe 50 feet across. The silence was total in the center, and faded, almost imperceptibly, as I approached the perimeter. I found tufts of fur at the boundary, gray-brown, likely rabbit or squirrel. I found bird feathers clustered along the tape line, laid out almost as if by design. At the heart of the circle, the oldest poplar tree towered nearly 16 stories high. Its bark was carved with symbols, thin cuts that looked recent, but weren't any script I recognized. I tried to take a photo, but my phone shut itself off. I used my field camera, but when I checked the viewfinder, everything inside the boundary was slightly blurred, even though the focus was sharp everywhere else. I decided to tag the tree with tape, planning to return for a closer survey with backup. But as I stepped toward it, the silence pressed in tighter, like a weight on my chest. The forest grew darker, and the boundaries seemed to shift subtly. Then I heard footsteps. Not animal scurrying or the soft crunch of a deer, but slow, deliberate, heavy steps moving just outside my field of vision. I turned, but there was nothing. The steps continued, pacing me as I traced the edge of the silent circle, always staying out of sight. I stopped, and the steps halted instantly. I walked backward, moving toward my bag, and they followed, echoing my pace. I decided not to panic. Instead, I sat down again, demonstrating non-threat posture as fieldwork had taught me. I opened my flask, sipped coffee, deliberately making noise. The forest didn't react. The footsteps resumed whenever I did, never visible, never drawing closer, simply matching my movement. After another hour, I became frustrated. I clapped, whistled, even sang as loud as I could. Nothing disturbed the silence, not a single echo, not a hint of wildlife. Even the wind seemed to stop. I examined the fungus clusters at the base of the central tree. Rings of unusual fungal growth radiated out like the ripples of a pond, with the boundary marked by clusters of white, bulbous mushrooms I hadn't seen in any Appalachian field guide. Some were arranged in geometric patterns, not the typical scatter you'd see from natural spore dispersal. I decided I'd waited long enough. I cut a sample of the mysterious fungus, placed it in a vial, and attached a GPS coordinate sticker. As I did so, the temperature dropped further. My breath fogged in the air. Impossible for late spring. I tried to take a photo with my camera again, forcing it to function by swapping batteries. The image was still, blurred at the center. That's when I noticed something else. Every single animal track inside the circle was pointing outward. No tracks came in. Even the smallest beetles seemed to avoid the border. I felt another wave of pressure, almost suffocating, and decided to leave. I marked my route carefully in case my GPS failed. As I stepped across the boundary, sound rushed back. A flood of birdsong, insect noise, wind in the leaves. The sudden volume made my ears ring. I walked straight out, not looking back. At the parking lot, I phoned my supervisor to report the incident. She told me to upload my samples and meet with the university biology team for analysis the next day. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were full of the silent forest, geometric fungus, and heavy footsteps. The next morning, I met with Dr. Cassidy and the lab team. We ran every test we could on the fungus sample, but the results were bizarre. Unidentifiable DNA sequences, no matches in North American databases. The analysis showed traces of rare earth metals, usually found near lightning strike sites or deep cave systems. When I checked my field photos on the lab's computer, every image taken inside the silent zone was glitched, colors warped, central forms blurred, edges unnaturally sharpened. Scanning through, I noticed a dark shape near the base of the tree in each photo, growing clearer from one image to the next. Dr. Cassidy frowned. "You say you never saw this with the naked eye?" I shook my head. "These patterns, they aren't pareidolia. There's movement between photos, like something was materializing as you documented." As the lab team debated, my phone buzzed. I checked the message. It was from my personal number, sent to itself. All it said was, "Come back. There's more to learn." I stared at the fungus samples, feeling the cold pressure from the silent circle again. In the weeks that followed, strange things happened. The sample container cracked without explanation, leaking spores onto the sterile workbench. Nothing grew, but equipment malfunctioned every time I tried to test the material. Field techs who visited Joyce Kilmer reported equipment failures, weird temperature drops, and occasional unexplained silence near the old poplar. Each time, their GPS logs were wiped. One specialist swore she'd heard slow footsteps following her, but found no prints. No one wanted to go back after sundown. Yesterday, I was assigned a new survey in Joyce Kilmer. I decided to walk the silent boundary again. This time, my camera wouldn't even turn on at the edge. My GPS kept resetting. I marked the periphery with surveyor's tape, but by the next morning, every scrap of tape had disappeared. Last night, I checked the university research portal for uploads on geometric fungal growth. A new folder had appeared with no user attached, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m. Inside were high-res images of the central poplar and surrounding circle. In every photo, that same dark shape stood at the base of the tree, clearer than ever, staring up at where my camera should have stood. I closed my laptop and turned off my phone. I haven't been back to Joyce Kilmer since, but sometimes late at night, I hear slow, deliberate footsteps on the wooden floors outside my bedroom, matching my movements perfectly, stopping when I stop. Outside my window, the forest is silent. If you visit Joyce Kilmer, look for the silent boundary. Mark it if you can, but don't cross it alone. If you do, whatever waits there already knows you by sound, by silence, and by your footprints. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 6 more stories from the mountains remain. Some boundaries aren't meant to be measured. When I found the ancient stone markers on the edge of Blue Ridge, my instruments failed. And at night, someone called my number from inside the tree line. My name is Kingsley, and I've been a land surveyor working the Appalachian foothills of Virginia for the past 14 years. I know the mountains' moods better than most locals. Surveying's not a glamorous job, but it's honest work, and the land's topography, its lines, restrictions, history, and secrets always spoke to me. I'd never been scared of a lonely hike or a long, cold day. But there was one job last autumn that changed my mind about what can hide in the woods and taught me Some places don't want their stories drawn onto a map. I got the job through my contacts at the county courthouse. A developer had bought a 40-acre patch off Blue Ridge Parkway. They wanted to know the true boundary before building a luxury cabin lot. The original line was ambiguous. Survey records missing, property disputes going back 90 years, rumors of Civil War encampments and ghost stories. It sounded like another day's work. Establish the boundary, drive metal stakes, record GPS coordinates, clean it up in CAD. I loaded my gear and headed up, eager for peace, and maybe a big bonus if the client's project got greenlit. It was late October, and the woods were still holding their color. Oak and maple burned orange, the trails dry beneath my boots, the air just cold enough to make the coffee in my thermos taste perfect. The approach was straightforward. I parked on an unmarked gravel pullout and trekked half a mile through undergrowth, following the coordinates I'd been given. The first 3 points plotted fine. My GPS worked, my transit gave good readings, and every flag found its spot. But then, on the 4th marker, something changed. The forest felt older here. Not just big trees, but something about the silence. The lack of birds. The way sunlight filtered down like it was passing through dusty water. The ground was scattered with old weathered stones, chunks of granite, half buried, some etched with symbols I couldn't quite make out. At first, I thought they were old field markers. Then I realized some were clearly arranged in lines, spaced neatly along the path. I bent down to examine one. The top was rough, but several sides were perfectly squared, older than any area marker I'd seen, and unaccounted for in state records. My GPS lost its signal the moment I touched the stone. My phone went dark. I tried restarting both, but nothing worked. I pulled a small notebook from my kit and sketched the stone's position, then mapped the other stones, each about 20 yards apart, each carved in a similar way, running in a gentle curve along a ridgeline. That's when I heard the first sound, a low, distant tapping. It might have been a woodpecker or a lost deer, but it echoed oddly, bouncing from stone to stone, never quite natural. I ignored it and kept working, but the tapping followed me, always 2 markers behind. I set the 5th stake near a grouping of particularly old stones. These were taller, wider, some marked with what looked like runes or a lost alphabet. I ran my hand across one and felt a sudden chill, as if the stone had absorbed cold from the earth and was radiating it outward. Impossible, with the sun shining and no wind. Minutes later, my backup GPS flashed a red error, a total loss of satellite link. My compass spun in my hand, never settling on a direction. I tried to walk the boundary by eye, but the trees all looked wrong, bent at unusual angles, roots exposed, bark stripped, as if something had clawed at them. I marked the location and moved on, trying not to get shaken. I reached the edge of the assigned parcel and found a clearing, a perfect circle about 80 feet across, surrounded by the same stone markers, now more numerous, forming a complete boundary. In the center stood a massive stone, taller than I was, carved with more runes, some so weathered they looked like scars. I set my pack down and drew the circle onto my map. The silence in the clearing was total. Not even the crunch of leaves underfoot seemed to echo. I took a photo, but my camera displayed static, grainy white noise instead of an image. I checked my phone again. It had powered itself off. Then a new sound started. Voices. Not clear, but sharp enough that I could make out syllables, different languages, overlapping each other. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, but they circled the clearing, weaving in and out of the stone ring, growing louder as I worked. I tried to leave, but every route out of the clearing led me back to the central stone. Eventually, I dropped my surveying gear and walked straight. A risk in the woods, but the only way to break the loop. After 10 fevered minutes, I stumbled out onto the original trail, exhausted and unnerved, seeds stuck in my boots, hands shaking. I made it back to my truck as dusk settled. My equipment still wouldn't power up. I drove home, noting every phone pole and mailbox like it was my last anchor to civilization. That night, I tried to process my findings. My notebook had faded, as if someone had smudged the graphite with a wet hand. My maps were inexplicably warped, lines stretched, boundaries blurred. When I plugged my phone into its charger, it powered on, but every photo was corrupted. White noise and strange symbols overlaying the images. My GPS unit rebooted to factory settings, wiping all my data. At midnight, my phone rang. The number was unknown. I picked up, expecting a robocall. No one spoke at first, but I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, deep. Then a single phrase. Not yours. Not now. Leave. I hung up and locked all my doors. The next morning, my work phone had 17 voicemails, all static, but some included footsteps in leaves, distant voices, and one in which someone whispered my name. My GPS unit displayed coordinates that don't exist, all zeros except for a single 6 in the third decimal place. The boundary survey was impossible to recreate. Every device malfunctioned, every map lost. I reported the issues to my supervisor, who said I'd never come back from Blue Ridge like this. She told me the old stories, about boundary stones that predate European settlement, about land surveyors who lost weeks in the woods, about coordinates that never resolve. Her advice: if the land doesn't want to be measured, you walk away. I spent the next week trying to fix my equipment. Nothing worked. Every charger fried, every battery drained in minutes. Then the calls started coming at random, never the same number, always at night. Always just breathing, sometimes footsteps, sometimes the sound of stones being tapped together. One evening, a text arrived. Come back. Bring more. We want the boundary measured. I ignored it. I started seeing stone markers in places they shouldn't be. Near my driveway, at the edge of grocery store parking lots, once at the bottom of my garden. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian, Malka, who'd written extensively about early settlements and native boundary rituals. She listened to my story with growing concern. She told me legends of the Stone Line, a myth among old-timers about a ring in the Blue Ridge that marked land never surrendered, land that reveals itself only when you try to measure it. People thought they could claim it, she said. But it's boundary country. What's theirs, what's not. Sometimes the land measures you. She suggested I return with an offering, something to signal respect for the boundary. Corn, coins, tobacco, whatever local tradition suggested. I didn't believe it, but I needed closure. I picked a cold, clear day and drove back. This time, I brought Malka and 2 volunteers, Bailey and Alea. We carried simple gifts, corn in baggies, a handful of old silver coins, a carved tobacco pipe from Malka's collection. We hiked to the original clearing. The stone markers were the same, but now the trees had shifted. The clearing felt bigger, and the central stone had new carvings, fresh lines, sharper than before. We placed our offerings on the stone and waited. The silence deepened. The air felt heavy, and we all heard footsteps circling us, even though no one moved. Malka recited a blessing in a language I didn't understand. The footsteps fell silent. The stones stopped feeling cold. My GPS beeped once, then reset. We left without incident. That night, I received no calls. My notebook didn't fade. My phone and GPS started working normally, but the boundary wasn't settled. The developer canceled the project, citing unforeseen obstacles. The land remains untouched, the stones unmoved. Occasionally, when driving in Blue Ridge, I glimpse a stone marker set beside the highway, almost lost in weeds. Sometimes my phone rings while I'm passing those spots. The caller never speaks, but I hear breathing, the sound of stones tapping together, and now and then a low chorus of voices repeating, "Not yours, not now." Some boundaries in Appalachia aren't meant to be measured. Best to walk away and leave the lines where they are. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 5 more stories from the woods await. Today, my 6-year-old daughter drew a perfect picture of a Civil War battlefield she's never seen. She said the soldiers asked her to tell their families they're still fighting. My name is Arisbeth, and I chaperone my daughter Ilani's school field trips whenever I can. Work is hectic as a paralegal in Knoxville, but I make time for these moments because I know she won't be little forever. When Jefferson Elementary announced a trip to Cumberland Gap National Historical Park, I signed up immediately. The kids would learn about the Civil War, see historical markers, and hike some easy trails. It seemed perfect, educational, outdoors, and a chance to spend the day with Ilani and her classmates. I'd been to Cumberland Gap before, years ago, with my parents. It's where Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia meet, a natural pass through the mountains that's been used for centuries. During the Civil War, both sides fought for control of the gap because whoever held it controlled passage through the Appalachians. The Park Service has done a good job preserving the history while making it accessible for families. The morning of the trip, I met the group at school. 32 second graders, 4 teachers, and 6 parent volunteers loaded onto 2 yellow buses. Ilani was bouncing with excitement, her backpack stuffed with snacks, and her notebook for drawing pictures of what she saw. She'd been looking forward to this for weeks. The drive took about 2 hours, winding through mountain roads until we reached the visitor center. The park ranger who greeted us was enthusiastic and kid-friendly, explaining how the gap was discovered by Daniel Boone and later became a crucial point during the Civil War. The children listened with varying degrees of attention while parents took photos. Our first stop was the Pinnacle Overlook, a short hike to a viewpoint where you can see 3 states. The kids were amazed by the vista, and several teachers used it as an impromptu geography lesson. Ilani made friends with 3 other girls, Gianna, Malin, and Emmy, and they stuck together as we moved through the park. After lunch, we visited the Civil War Interpretive Trail. This was where things began to feel different. The trail winds through areas where actual battles were fought. There are markers explaining troop movements, rifle pits you can still see, and monuments to soldiers who died there. The Park Service has done an excellent job preserving the sites, while making them educational rather than morbid. But as we walked deeper into the woods, following the path where soldiers once marched, the atmosphere changed. It started when we reached the 3rd historical marker. The ranger was explaining how Union forces had held a position on this ridge when Ilani suddenly stopped walking and pointed into the empty woods to our left. "Look at all the soldiers," she said. I followed her gaze. I saw trees, fallen logs, autumn leaves, nothing else. "What soldiers, honey?" I asked. "The ones standing by those trees, in the blue uniforms." I looked again. Still nothing. But Gianna, Malin, and Emmy had stopped too, and all 3 were looking in the same direction. "I see them too," Gianna whispered. "They look sad." Mrs. Chen, Ilani's teacher, came over to see what had captured the girls' attention. "What are you looking at?" "The Civil War soldiers," Malin said, matter-of-factly. "There's a lot of them over there. They're all looking at us." Mrs. Chen exchanged a glance with me. Kids have active imaginations, and we were at a Civil War battlefield where they'd been learning about soldiers all day. It made sense they might think they saw something. "That's nice, girls. Sometimes our imaginations help us think about history. Should we catch up with the group?" But the 4 girls didn't move. They stood transfixed, staring into the woods with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "They want to talk to us," Emmy said quietly. "Who wants to talk to you?" I asked. "The soldiers. The one in front is waving us over." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I looked where the girls were pointing and saw nothing but forest. But all 4 children were seeing the same thing, describing the same details, reacting to movements I couldn't observe. The ranger had moved on with the rest of the group, but I called to him. "Excuse me, could you come here for a moment?" When I explained what the girls were seeing, his expression became serious. He knelt down to their level. "Can you tell me what the soldiers look like?" he asked gently. Ilani spoke first. "They're wearing blue coats with brass buttons. Some have hats, some don't. Their clothes are dirty and torn. The one in front has a beard, Gianna added, and there's blood on his shirt. They all have guns, Malin said. Long ones. But they're not pointing them at us. How many do you see? The ranger asked. The girls conferred quietly, counting. 15, Emmy announced. Maybe 20. It's hard to tell because some are behind trees. The ranger was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, do they seem friendly or scary? Not scary, Ilani said. Just sad. Really, really sad. They want us to tell someone something, Gianna said, but I can't hear what they're saying. The ranger stood up and pulled me aside. This happens sometimes, he said quietly. Not often, but sometimes children see things here that adults don't. We've had reports over the years. Always children, usually around the same age as these girls. You're serious? Dead serious. This particular area saw heavy fighting in September 1863. Union forces held this ridge for 3 days against Confederate attacks. A lot of men died here. He paused. The strange thing is, the children always describe the uniforms accurately. Details they couldn't know unless they've studied Civil War military history extensively. I looked back at the girls. They were still staring into the woods, but now they seemed to be listening to something. What should we do? I asked. Let them finish. In my experience, this usually lasts just a few minutes. Then we'll catch up with the group. But it didn't last just a few minutes. For the next 20 minutes, the 4 girls stood absolutely still, occasionally nodding or whispering to each other. Other parents and children had noticed now, and Mrs. Chen was getting concerned about keeping the group together. Finally, Ilani turned to me. Mama, do you have paper? They want us to draw something. I pulled out my phone to take notes, but Ilani shook her head. They want pictures, drawings. They said it's important. Mrs. Chen provided paper and pencils from the supplies she always carried. The 4 girls sat on the ground and began drawing with intense concentration. They worked in silence, completely absorbed in their task. When they finished, I looked at Ilani's drawing and felt my breath catch. It showed a battlefield scene with remarkable detail, soldiers in accurate uniforms, the correct landscape, even the positioning of trees that matched the historical markers we'd passed. But this wasn't something a 6-year-old should be able to draw. The perspective was wrong for a child's artwork, too sophisticated, too detailed. Gianna's drawing showed similar scenes from a different angle. Malin had drawn what looked like a field hospital with wounded soldiers. Emmy's picture showed soldiers with their hands raised, as if surrendering. The most unsettling part was that each drawing contained details that matched historical records of the September 1863 battle. Details no second grader should know. They want us to tell their families, Ilani announced as she finished her drawing. Tell their families what? I asked. That they're still here, that they remember their names, and they want their families to know they tried to be brave. The ranger examined the drawings, his expression growing more troubled with each one. These are remarkably accurate, he said quietly. The hospital location, the surrender scene, even the tree placement. These match eyewitness accounts from 1863. How is that possible? Before he could answer, Gianna spoke up. The man with the beard told me his name. He said he's from a place called Maryville, and his mama's name is Sarah, and he wants her to know he got the letter she sent. Maryville is a real town, about an hour from where we stood, and military records from the Civil War often mention letters from home. Did he tell you his name? The ranger asked. James. James something that starts with M. Morrison. Morgan. The ranger looked pale. I'll need to check the casualty records, but there were several Jameses from East Tennessee who died in this battle. Malin raised her hand, like she was in class. The soldier I talked to said his name was William, and he's from Virginia, and he wants his wife Mary to know the baby was born safe because he saw her in a dream. By now, the main group had moved on without us, and Mrs. Chen was getting anxious about the schedule, but the ranger seemed reluctant to leave. "Girls," he said gently, "are the soldiers still there?" All four looked toward the woods and shook their heads. "They went back to the trees," Eleni said, "but they said thank you for listening." We rejoined the group and continued the tour, but the atmosphere had changed. The four girls were quieter than usual, and they stayed close together. Other children kept asking what they'd seen, but the girls just said they'd been drawing pictures. On the bus ride home, I sat with Alani and looked at her drawing again. In the daylight, away from the battlefield, it seemed even more impossible. The detail, the accuracy, the mature perspective, none of it made sense for a 6-year-old's artwork. "Ilani, honey, where did you learn to draw soldiers like this?" "I didn't learn. The soldier man showed me how. He put his hand on mine and helped me draw what really happened." That evening, I did some research online. I found casualty records from the September 1863 battle at Cumberland Gap. There was indeed a James Morrison from Maryville who died in that battle, and a Private William Hayes from Virginia, whose wife Mary had given birth to their first child 2 weeks before he was killed. I also found something else. In a collection of digitized Civil War letters at the Tennessee State Library, there was correspondence from a Sarah Morrison to her son James, mentioning that she'd sent him a letter just before the September battle. I printed everything I found and put it in a folder. I wasn't sure what to do with the information, but it felt important to preserve it. The next day, Mrs. Chen called me. The other 3 mothers had contacted her with similar concerns about their daughters' drawings. All 4 girls had produced artwork far beyond their skill level, with historical details they couldn't have known. More troubling, all 4 girls had mentioned specific names, dates, and personal details that, when researched, proved to be historically accurate. A week later, I drove back to Cumberland Gap alone. I brought copies of the records I'd found and the girls' drawings. At the visitor center, I asked to speak with the ranger who'd been with us on the field trip. When I showed him what I'd discovered, he wasn't surprised. "This has happened 4 times in the past 5 years, he said. "Always children, always in the same area of the battlefield. They see soldiers. They draw pictures with impossible accuracy, and they relay personal information that checks out against historical records. What do you do with that information? We document it. We file reports. And sometimes, when we can verify the details, we add the information to our historical records. The National Park Service takes these incidents seriously, even if they can't explain them." He showed me a file cabinet filled with similar reports. Children's drawings, verified. Historical details, accounts of conversations with soldiers who died 160 years ago. "Do you believe they're really seeing something?" I asked. "I believe the children are experiencing something real to them, and given the accuracy of the information they provide, I can't dismiss it as imagination." That was 6 months ago. Ilani hasn't mentioned the soldiers since that day, but she still has her drawing. Sometimes I catch her looking at it with a thoughtful expression that seems too old for her face. Last week, she asked if we could go back to Cumberland Gap. "Why?" I asked. "I want to see if they're still there. I want to make sure they know we told their families." I'm not sure what to think about any of this. I'm a practical person, trained in law and evidence, but I've seen the drawings, verified the historical details, and watched my 6-year-old daughter communicate with something I couldn't see or hear. If your child ever tells you they see soldiers on a battlefield, listen to them. Take them seriously. And maybe, if they want to draw what they see, let them. Because sometimes the past isn't as distant as we think, and sometimes those who died far from home are still trying to send messages to the people they loved. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 4 more encounters from the mountains await. If you had asked me, I would have sworn I was in those woods for 6 hours. But when I finally found the trailhead, the parking ticket on my truck said I'd been gone for 3 weeks. My name is Renee, and I've spent most of my adult life working deep in the Appalachian hills of North Carolina. Outsiders call it poaching, but for us ginseng diggers, it's inheritance, knowing where the wild roots grow and when to dig without getting caught. The money's good, enough for a few months if you know what you're doing, enough to risk the penalties if you don't. I never thought of myself as a criminal, just someone with more mountain in my blood than most. This summer, I decided to push deeper into the Nantahala National Forest than I'd ever dared. The ginseng in the easy spots had been picked clean, and I needed a fresh patch if I was going to make rent. I'd heard rumors about a watershed nobody dared touch, a spot where old-timers had vanished and local warnings kept even game wardens away. I ignored them, like any good son of these hills. Early one July morning, I parked at the trailhead with a backpack, digging tools, a camouflage tarp for cover, and enough water to last the day. The forest was stunning, high canopy filtering the sun into green shadows, air fresh with moss and river spray. I marked my trail with bits of orange flag tape, careful to leave no evidence for rangers, but enough for me to find my way back. I crossed 3 ridges, scrambled down slippery rocks, and finally hit a level patch thick with ferns, a promising spot. A single white pine stood over a patch of herbaceous growth. I spotted it almost at once. A clump of mature wild ginseng, 3-pronged, healthy berries, worth hundreds, if not thousands, to the right buyer. My heart raced at the gold mine in front of me. I dug with expert care, extracting roots, brushing off dirt, whispering thanks to the earth as tradition dictates. The haul was better than I'd imagined. Enough money to change my luck. When the pack was full, I checked my pockets. I had an hour before sunset. Time to head out, mark my way, get home before anyone knew what I'd done. But when I looked around for my flag tape, it was gone. Every bit of orange I'd left was missing, replaced by strange marks on trees, twisted sticks arranged like rune symbols, bits of cloth tied to branches, shavings scattered in unnatural patterns. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. The forest felt different, denser, colder, the trees older and more twisted. The light faded faster than it should, and a mist began to settle on the ground, swirling between my boots. I pushed through the undergrowth, relying on instinct and experience, but every direction led me to deadfall, ravines, or impassable thickets. The map on my compass spun without settling. My phone lost service, the battery dropping to 0 in minutes. After an hour, I found a campsite. At first, I thought it was someone else's. A tarp thrown over a branch, a ring of stones, a rusted lantern. But the supplies were mine. My water bottles, my boots, even a pack of cigarettes I'd left in my jacket. But everything was wrong. My gear looked decades old, covered in rot, the fabric split, the lantern rusted through. Panic froze me for a minute. I tried to recall the trail, the ridgelines, the rivers. I found the river, but it ran the wrong way. I shouted for help, but the woods swallowed every sound. As night crept in, I wrapped myself in the old tarp and waited for daylight. At sunrise, I started again, searching for anything familiar. My flag tape, a snapped branch, even the trail I'd made coming in. Every path led me to a new patch of unfamiliar ground. Another day passed. I rationed water, chewing on bitter ginseng roots for energy. The mist rose each day and settled again by dusk. On the 3rd sunrise, I found my camp, the one I'd just left. But now it looked even older, my gear black with mold, the tarp torn to ribbons. The ginseng roots in my pack had shriveled, turning gray and powdery. My boots felt stiff, the soles almost rotted away. Frustration turned to despair. I looked for anyone, rangers, hikers, even game wardens who'd arrest me and get me out. I called for help each hour. Once, I heard dogs barking but couldn't find the source. On what I thought was the 4th evening, I climbed a rise and spotted a clearing. In it stood a truck, an old Ford, the paint faded, the tires flat. I ran to it desperately, hoping for salvation. It was my own truck, covered in leaves and dirt, windshield faded, a parking ticket tucked under the wiper blade. The ticket was dated 3 weeks earlier. I stared, stunned. I'd only been gone a few hours, maybe a day at most. I checked the rest of the vehicle, my belongings inside but all ruined by time and neglect. My phone was dead, showing a calendar date nearly a month later than I'd entered the forest. I sat in the truck and wept while dusk fell again. As darkness covered the woods, I saw shapes moving among the trees, figures hunched low, faces hidden, watching me from the shadows. They moved in slow circles, never coming close, never speaking. My instincts screamed not to approach or make noise. In the morning, I gathered all the ginseng I could carry and found a trail. It felt different, but I followed it anyway. An hour later, I broke through the tree line onto a familiar road, surrounded by fresh saplings and a breeze that smelled like spring. I hitchhiked to town. No one believed my story. The pharmacist wouldn't buy my roots. They'd rotted in my pack, worthless as mulch. That night, I found my house just as I'd left it, mail stacked, nothing changed except for one thing. On my front porch, arranged in a perfect circle, were sticks tied together with orange tape, the same tape I'd brought for marking the trail. Since then, I haven't returned to the forest. Friends who poach in Nantahala tell their own stories of missing time, seeing their own camps aged and ruined, or having their trail markers replaced with runes. Some disappear entirely. The ginseng patches grow wild and untouched. The woods, it seems, are keeping what they want: roots, people, or both. If you head deep into Appalachian forests looking for fortune, remember, some places change while you're inside. And when you finally come out, you may not bring back anything except lost time. Subscribe to Haunted Fears, Horror Family. 3 more tales from the wild remain. The cabin my uncle left me was supposed to be empty. When we got there for opening weekend, all the lights were on and something had been living inside. My name is True, and I'm 17 years old. This is the first hunting season I've been allowed to go without adult supervision. Just me and my best friend Halo, who's 18 and has his own truck. My uncle Yeshua passed away last spring and left me his hunting cabin in the mountains near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. It's remote, no electricity except a generator, no running water except a hand pump outside. The kind of place you go to get away from everything, to sit in the woods at dawn and wait for deer, to feel like you're part of something older than cell phones and school and all the noise of regular life. We'd planned this trip for months. Opening weekend of rifle season, just the 2 of us, proving we could handle ourselves in the wilderness. My mom wasn't thrilled about it, but she knew how much the cabin meant to me. Uncle Yeshua had taken me hunting there since I was 12, taught me everything I know about tracking, field dressing, respecting the woods. When he died, leaving me the cabin felt like passing on a legacy. We loaded Halo's truck Friday after school. Sleeping bags, coolers full of food, rifles, ammunition, hunting licenses, enough gear to last the weekend. The drive took 3 hours, most of it on progressively smaller roads, until we turned onto a dirt track that wound through dense forest for 2 miles before reaching the cabin. It was late afternoon when we arrived, that golden hour before sunset, when the light turns. Everything amber and shadows stretch long across the ground. The cabin sat in a small clearing, a simple structure my grandfather had built in the 1960s. 1 room with a loft, a wood stove, a table, and 4 bunks. Rustic but solid, the kind of place that had survived decades of mountain weather. That's when we saw the lights. Every window glowed with warm yellow light, like someone had lit all the kerosene lamps inside. Halo and I looked at each other. "Did your uncle have electricity installed?" he asked. "No, just the generator, and I have the keys." I pulled them from my pocket to prove it. We sat in the truck for a few minutes trying to figure out what we were seeing. Maybe another hunter had broken in, mistaking it for an abandoned cabin. Maybe squatters had found it. But the place was miles from any road most people would use, and hunting season had only opened today. "Maybe your uncle left the lamps lit last time he was here," Halo suggested. "That was November last year. Nothing burns for 6 months." We got out of the truck cautiously, leaving our rifles but bringing flashlights. The clearing was quiet except for evening birds and wind in the trees. No other vehicles, no signs anyone else was there. I knocked on the cabin door. "Hello? Anyone inside?" No answer. I tried the door. Unlocked. I pushed it open slowly. Inside, 3 kerosene lamps burned on the table, their wicks trimmed perfectly, their glass chimneys clean. The cabin was warm, heat radiating from the wood stove in the corner. Through the iron grate, I could see fresh coals glowing red. "Someone's definitely been here," Halo whispered. I stepped inside, looking around. Everything was exactly as I remembered from my last visit with Uncle Yeshua. The bunks made up with old wool blankets, the table set with tin plates and cups, the rifle rack on the wall holding my uncle's old hunting rifle that should have been locked in the estate storage. But there was something wrong with it all. The cabin felt lived in, but not recently. There was dust on everything, thick layers of it on the table around the lamps, on the bunks, on the floor, except for one path, a trail of clean floorboards leading from the door to the stove to one of the bunks, as if someone had walked the same route over and over, wearing away the dust. "This is creepy," Halo said. "Maybe we should just camp outside." I wanted to agree, but something stubborn in me resisted. This was my cabin now, my inheritance. I wasn't going to be scared away on our first night. "Let's check the rest of the place, make sure no one's hiding in the loft." We climbed the ladder to the loft, empty except for more dust and some old hunting gear. We checked under the bunks, in the small closet, behind the woodpile. No one. "Okay, so someone broke in, lit the lamps in the stove, then left," I said. "Probably heard us coming and took off into the woods." It didn't make sense, but it was better than the alternatives my mind was suggesting. We decided to stay. We unloaded the truck, brought our gear inside, and made dinner on the wood stove. Beans and sausage from a can, bread that tasted amazing in the mountain air. We ate by lamplight, talking about where we'd set up our stands in the morning, what we'd do if we actually got a deer. Around 9 o'clock, we heard the first sound. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps, boot heels on wood. They started at the far end of the porch and moved toward the door. We froze, listening. The steps reached the door and stopped. A long pause. Then 3 knocks. Steady, polite knocks, like someone asking permission to enter. Halo grabbed his rifle. I moved to the door and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. Just silence. I opened the door fast, rifle ready. The porch was empty. No one there, no footprints in the dust that covered the boards. No sign anyone had been standing there seconds ago. "Wind," Halo suggested, but his voice was uncertain. "Wind doesn't knock 3 times. We locked the door, though the lock was old and probably useless. We decided to sleep in shifts, one of us awake, while the other rested. I took the first watch, sitting at the table with a lamp turned low, listening to the cabin settle and creak around me. At midnight, I heard the footsteps again, this time inside the cabin. They started in the loft, moving across the floorboards above my head. Slow, steady steps, pacing from one end to the other. I looked up at the ceiling, watching dust drift down through the cracks between boards. "Halo," I whispered urgently. He was already awake, staring at the ceiling too. "Please tell me you hear that." "I hear it." The steps stopped. Then the ladder creaked as weight settled on the rungs. We both grabbed our rifles and pointed them at the loft opening. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hold the gun steady. The ladder creaked again. And again. Something was climbing down, one rung at a time. But nothing appeared. The ladder creaked under invisible weight, the rungs bending slightly as if supporting something heavy, but we saw nothing climbing down. The creaking reached the bottom rung. Then footsteps crossed the floor, following that same worn path through the dust, from the ladder to the stove to the bunk in the corner. The bunk Uncle Yeshua always used. We watched, frozen, as the blanket on that bunk shifted, compressing as if someone was lying down on it. The pillow developed a depression shaped like a head. The blanket rose and fell slightly, rhythmically, like someone breathing. "We need to leave," Halo said. "Right now." I wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I was staring at that bunk, at the shape under the blanket, remembering how Uncle Yeshua always slept in that exact spot, how he'd climb down from checking the loft every night before bed, how he'd stoke the fire one last time, and then lie down, just like that. "Uncle Yeshua," I said quietly. The breathing stopped. The blanket went still. Then slowly, the depression in the pillow shifted, as if someone was turning their head to look at me. A voice came from the bunk, rough, familiar, exactly like my uncle's voice. "You shouldn't be here, True." My blood went cold. "Why not?" "This isn't your cabin anymore. Hasn't been since I died. I tried to leave, but something won't let me go. And now you're here, and it might not let you leave either." "What won't let you leave?" "The woods, the mountain, whatever it is that keeps calling me back here every night. I wake up in the cabin, I tend the fire, I wait for morning so I can go hunting. But morning never comes anymore. It's always this night, over and over. And now you're part of it." Halo was backing toward the door. "True, we have to go." But I couldn't stop asking questions. How do we leave? How do we break the loop? I don't know. I've tried everything. Burning the cabin, breaking the lamps, leaving and never looking back. But I always wake up here again the next night, and everything's reset. Maybe if you leave now, before you sleep here, you can get out. But if you fall asleep in this cabin, you might be stuck like me. I looked at Halo. His hand was on the door handle. "Come on, True. We're leaving." I stood up, still watching the bunk. "What about you?" "I'm already gone, son. I died 6 months ago. This is just an echo, a loop I can't break. Don't let it catch you too." We ran. We left everything. Sleeping bags, gear, food, rifles. We just ran to the truck, jumped in, and Halo gunned the engine. The dirt road seemed longer on the way out, winding endlessly through dark trees. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see lights from the cabin following us, but there was only darkness. We didn't stop driving until we hit the interstate, 40 miles away. We found an all-night diner and sat there until dawn, drinking coffee, not talking about what happened. When the sun came up, Halo said, "We should report it. Tell someone about the cabin." "Tell them what? That my dead uncle is trapped in a time loop? That he warned us not to sleep there?" "I don't know, man. I just know I'm never going back." I haven't been back either. The cabin sits there in the mountains, probably with the lamp still burning, the stove still warm, my uncle's echo still going through the same night over and over. Sometimes I wonder if he's still trying to leave. Sometimes I wonder if other hunters have found the cabin, seen the lights, gone inside. If they made it out, or if they're trapped there too, adding their own echoes to whatever holds that place. Last week, I got a letter from the county. Property taxes are due on the cabin. They want to know if I plan to keep it or sell it. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to burn it down, break the loop somehow. But part of me is terrified that burning it might make things worse, might release whatever's trapped there, or trap my uncle's echo somewhere even darker. For now, the cabin sits empty. Or maybe it's not empty. Maybe every night the lamps come on, the stove gets warm, and my uncle climbs down from the loft to lie on his bunk, waiting for a morning that never comes. If you inherit property in these mountains, check it carefully before you sleep there. Some places have their own time, their own loops, and once you're inside, you might not find your way back to the world you knew. That's the last of our 11 disturbing Appalachian horror stories, Haunted Fears family. If these tales from the deep woods gave you chills, make sure you're subscribed to Haunted Fears and hit that notification bell so you never miss another terrifying encounter. Drop a comment below and tell us which story scared you the most, or share your own experience from the mountains. And if you know someone brave enough to handle these stories, share this video with them and bring them into the Haunted Fears horror family. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, some places in Appalachia don't follow the rules of the world we know.